So a lot of people asked for this manga, thus you shall receive. Also, after an almost 2-year hiatus, the series is finally returning. Exciting times. 6 times this planet has been visited by meteors. 6 times it was broken and gave birth to 6 moons, leaving it an emaciated shadow of its former self. When there was nothing left of the land but a single beach, all life fled to the ocean. And on that beach, life suited to the sparse environment appeared. Some creatures who had flourished when the moon was still one were too slow in their escape and sunk into the seas. They were eaten by tiny creatures on the ocean's floor, turned to inanimate objects, crystallized over the ages, and again they were brought back up upon that very beach. This is Foss, our main character of the manga known as Land of the Lustrous, and as you can see, they are a gem-like individual. The world has changed, humanity has changed, people have changed, and with how much it has evolved, these gem-like individuals have been born, descendants, if you will. They have arisen up out of the ocean and taken form in this shape. Foss is a very kind, quirky, enigmatic individual. Someone that's very fun to be around, someone that wants to do better, wants to achieve bigger and greater things, but unfortunately their sturdiness, their hardness, the scale of their gem-like structure is way too fragile. So any job, anything, any position they put themselves within has a drawback to it. They can easily shatter and lose parts of their body. To them, this is more of an annoyance, as they are deemed as being immortal. They don't know the concept of time, they don't age, they don't grow old. However, the more pieces of their body they lose over time, the more their memory or their emotions start to wander a little bit. These pieces can be replaced, they can be fixed, but it comes at that cost, which for one can be rather severe. Now these gems would come to fight what is known as the moon people, Lunarians, individuals that come down trying to take the gems for themselves so they can wear it as ornaments or use the shards and arrows, fit their dresses, whatever they need, basically kidnapping the gems and taking them to the moon. So the gems learn how to fight, they train, they stand guard, they rotate around this idea of protecting their own, and they do it rather successfully. But it would seem there is more to this situation, more to the gems, more to the moon people and the world itself, more to Foss as an individual, someone that is considered the weakest but slowly starts to transform and evolve into something entirely else that is completely unpredictable, that is abnormal within this world, something that they have never seen before. And this would slowly start to unravel the mystery of the world, of the gems, of the moon people, and anything else they come in contact with. Where do they all come from? How do they come to exist? All of these questions slowly get answered through Foss exploring this idea themselves. So this is the manga known as Land of the Lustrous, and I had a pretty enjoyable time with it. There's a lot of great characters, there's a lot of beautiful artistry, there's a very compelling story, and at the heart of it, all of it is about identity, at least for me, especially within the form of our main character Foss and their identity. One of the biggest things about Land of the Lustrous, even if you haven't noticed through the imagery, is that there is no genders, and this plays a rather massive role in the story shaping itself and one's identity. It's not something that's constantly mentioned, nor is it really even conceptually played upon until much later on, but it is something that helps reinforce the story in its isolated situation. The world, the characters, where the gems come from, how they learn to exist, and everything in between makes a lot of sense to why they identify as this, why being sexless or androgynous or genderless in its entirety is extremely functional within their own little society. It's very tiny and very portional, but it works. It seems healthy, it seems unproblematic, and it's open to interpretation, which is one of the most beautiful things about it. Considering, for me, this story is about Foss's identity and how they evolve and grow over time, this aspect of the story is directly connected. And you'll notice this change in appearance very drastically within Foss when they start to run into more problematic situations. Foss is easily the front and center individual of this series. You're going to read it for them, and watching their journey or their evolution into the individual they become is not only heartbreaking but bittersweet, enjoyable, beautiful, tragic. All of these these conflicting statements, both good and bad, and that's kind of the whole point. You're seeing Foss at their best, but also Foss at their worst, and how they conflict with one another. What is right or wrong is completely irrelevant, and perspective and interpretation becomes the primary leader. Morally, you think to yourself where Foss should go, and everyone's going to have their own version of that, which is very beautiful. Not to spoil everything, but to give you a better idea of what I mean, Foss goes from being this very innocent, childlike, quirky, enigmatic individual filled with so much life and wanting to find their purpose, to someone that is cold and calculated and manipulative and really distorted in a lot of different ways, but also wants the best for their people. They want to achieve bigger and better things. They want to save individuals. They want to create a future that is forthcoming and beautiful and happy. Foss completely changes and evolves within their own identity into someone that is almost unrecognizable, and you can't help but feel indirectly sorry for them. Even though this is a point of conflict for Foss, it also comes in the form of positivity, something that Foss has always wanted to be and always wanted to achieve, and now that they have the power to do so, even though it has come at the cost of them changing mentally, emotionally, and even physically, you ask yourself, is it really for the better? Is this something the original Foss technically would have wanted? Or could there still be the original Foss just free from the shackles of the fragile nature that they once were? Again, identity is a very massive part of this story. It's very powerful and important. So personally, I really love how they use this genderless kind of androgynous look for all of the characters, and that it doesn't change at all. It helps reinforce this idea of identity and wanting to love yourself in whatever way you feel fit, that everyone is equal, that everyone has a fair chance of doing their best within this world regardless of anything else, that it does not matter who you love or how you view yourself or what you identify yourself to be, that you will always be welcomed, you will always be acknowledged, you will always be supported, and that is something that you deserve. I would really love to talk about how the quote-unquote human nature is split within this manga, but unfortunately I would have to go into spoiler territory, which I don't want to do. But just know there are certain elements within human nature that is split and singled out within its entirety, and it's reflected within different things. The gem-like beings is only one version of it, and it's very interesting when these other elements come into play that clash with one another. You start to see fragments of what was human nature starting to combine itself once again. It all kind of shapes and forms into the idea that is Foss. Foss becomes one of the most complex and human-like individuals, even though they are technically a gem. And there's a lot of different reasons for this, a lot of complex world building, lore building that goes into understanding how Foss functions as an individual. But the more you progress through the story, the more quote-unquote human-like Foss becomes, filled to the brim with flaws and sins and warped ideologies. No human is perfect. That is the point. If you haven't already noticed, the art style reflects this in a very beautiful way. I adore it. I think it's incredibly gorgeous. It's pretty. It's breathtaking. There's a lot of different ways that the art lures you into this sense of amazement or wow factor, which is something that you don't get all too often. There's a level of mystery, I feel, within this artistry that lures you to different questions, asking about what is this meant to represent within this artwork? Why is it depicted this way? What is this godly being that I'm actually looking at? I absolutely love how it draws that question. On the other hand, I dislike how mushy it can all be. With how much clarity and finesse goes into this artwork, a lot of it gets cluttered up very easily. And I don't think it's the fault of the artists themselves, but more so how the story just depicts itself in general. There's not all too much complexity within its shading, so some abilities and actions and just sequences in general congeal together to make something that's very weirdly comprehensive. You can kind of get it, but it might take you a little bit more to understand it thoroughly or to fully see the whole picture. There might even be some panels that you just can't understand whatsoever because they're mashed together in this very weird way. In hindsight, you're not missing out on much. Sometimes it can be even difficult to recognize what individual you're actually looking at character-wise, but I think this does also play into the idea that everyone is kind of equal and very similar to one another. That doesn't really change change in their appearance. They look almost identical other than the hairstyles or maybe their weapons that represent them. For its powerful moments, however, with what the story wants to tell, it is absolutely iconic. Some of the most poetic imagery used to show off these very incredible moments. These super powerful pieces that come to life that feel absolutely breathtaking to look at, painful even. I think none of them on this roll of complaints. I want to rapid fire a few. Firstly, the story is very difficult to get into. It has a lot of exposition that does a lot for the world, for the characters, for the story, but is very bloated in a sense. It's a very difficult hurdle to kind of jump over right at the beginning of the story. People are trying to get into your world, get into your characters, and the quickest way to turn them off that is to throw so much unnecessary information at the person reading it. Luckily, I was able to kind of push through it. It does start to ease up over time and become a lot more digestible, but at the beginning, I would recommend taking it very slow. Do not try to speed through it or cram in as many chapters as possible. Take it one step at a time, digest all the information you want, and you'll probably thoroughly enjoy it. Or at least you will be more adjusted to the situation. It's not the worst thing to ever exist. In hindsight, I actually appreciate all of the legwork done at the beginning to giving so much exposition. It's just when you first read it, it's a little bit scary. There's a lot of terminology used that you just don't understand, and a lot of things you're still learning about the story, the characters, the process very early on. It's a lot to take in, it's a lot to remember, and sometimes a lot of it can just be unimportant. Stuff to build character or lore or world that isn't within the forefront of the conversation, but more so stuff to fluff out the back and to prop up the front even further, which is perfectly fine, but once again, can be very difficult when it's right at the beginning. An issue that I also have is the essence of time. I could not tell you how much time has passed within this story, and while I think it works within the story itself and the fact that they don't have a concept of time, that connection back to myself is a little bit more warped, because it's not necessarily the time I have a problem with, but more so how everything crams together within a set amount of time, which within the grand picture isn't really a thing. What I mean by this is that the story likes to put a lot of different time jumps within there and a lot of different actions within there that string off very effortlessly one after the other. Now this is perfectly fine when you're following the story and reading it, but you'll notice that there is a massive change and drastic jump in certain things. Before you know it, 6 months have passed between 4 chapters. You don't see this. The essence of time is completely warped in that sense, so it kind of plays with your mind on the perception of the events that you're reading. And sometimes you may have to double take the situation just to make sure that nothing has changed, or this is either the same event or a new event. This is what I mean when I say that it's not necessarily the time problem itself, because they don't have a perception of time and it does not matter to them, but more so the events that take place are so streamlined of one another that sometimes they can either all blur together or are so entirely far apart that you just can't tell. It's a very odd balance, and within the grand structure of the story itself from start to finish, it's very difficult to point out where arcs start and end and how often they bleed into one another. If you're trying to focus on the whole picture, you get lost very easily. There's not much clarity there, which is somewhat understandable because of the world and all the information that it gives you and all the information that it doesn't give you. But if you focus on Foss, which I do recommend this, considering they are the main character obviously, pay attention to their journey, their identity, their growth, it becomes a lot more manageable. And I feel like the author purposefully does this, makes the background rather confusing and a little bit convoluted or scary, and puts Foss in the forefront to guide you with some sort of comfort. But Foss won't guide you through that scary world. Foss will somewhat glance and dance over it, and if you want to understand it yourself, you kind of have to dive in and get it. It's going to be a little bit of effort, but sometimes it can be worthwhile, and it will completely depend on yourself. In conclusion, this story is a very interesting one, especially Foss. I love this character. I love their journey, their growth, their evolution, everything that they go through. I enjoy the world and all the characters within it and how much it has changed within the recent 30-odd chapters. It is almost like a completely different story. For a lot of you, this is going to be a slow burn. This is going to be something that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort just to get through, but trust me, when it clicks, when it fully sits within your head, it will become extremely enjoyable. Everything will flow effortlessly and you will absolutely love every moment of it, including Foss. Just at the beginning, take your time with it, try to enjoy yourself, don't rush through it. With that, however, leave a like, subscribe, check out my second second channel, and I will see you within the next one. Goodbye.